say you do have someone, and
Right.
this case has already been ruled on sort of making T-shirts. You have a Christian business, and I think this was in Lexington, Kentucky, in my state. They chose not to make shirts that were pro-choice. They chose not to make shirts that were Democrat. But then they chose to not make T-shirts supporting gay marriage. The thing is that does sound to me a little bit like a freedom issue.
Well, Kentucky Senator Rand Paul signing a case in Kentucky where the court ordered a Christian printing company to print LGBT shirts on the grounds that not doing so would constitute discrimination. Some are now concerned about the negative effect on religious institutions following Friday's Supreme Court decision backing same-sex marriage, and that is where we'll start today's roundtable. Please welcome to the roundtable senior political contributor to Forbes.com and co-host of the Daily Wrap, Rick Ungar, also joining us in Newsmax headquarters is Kevin Broderick. Thank you both for being with us here.
Anytime.
All right, Rick, let's start with you. Let's get your reaction to the Supreme Court case today.
Yeah, it's fascinating to say the least. Obviously, it's a huge impact on our society. I got to tell you, I got a call shortly after the decision came out from a friend congratulating me. And I went, what are you congratulating me for? He said, well, you won a victory this morning in the court. I said, no, my life hasn't been changed one bit. I just spoke to my wife. I didn't notice anything that's different. I think people have to realize that, not all of us are affected by this. We're not going to be affected by it. But, any day where the Supreme Court of the United States recognizes existing rights granted to any American under the Constitution is a darn good day.
All right, Kevin, what do you say?
I agree to a certain extent with Rick. It's not going to affect most people's day-to-day lives, but it is a landmark decision because it does change the way we define marriage as a society. So we're going to include same-sex couples, which, as we've seen with public opinion, has been swaying very, very aggressively in that direction. Even 10 years ago, it was like a 60-40 issue for traditional marriage. Now it's like a 60-40 issue going the other way. So, this is something that the country's been moving towards. It would have happened in the next 5 to 7 years by the states themselves. So, as a young conservative, I consider marriage sort of a state issue. And I don't think that, denying certain citizens a right that everybody else has is something that conservatives should stamp their claim on, and I'm happy it's off the docket for 2016, to be honest with you.
Well, a lot of Republicans might feel that way. They don't have to litigate this in that particular way. Now, there are some concerns. Just now, we've seen a rush to defend religious liberties by a lot of conservative members of Congress and Republican presidential candidates. That includes some religious schools, though, in the past. They have concerns as well. Those that do not condone relationships before marriage, specific sexual relationships, are afraid that if they continue to ban gay relationships, their tax-exempt status could be taken away for, quote, fundamentally violating a national public policy. This under the reasoning of a 1983 Supreme Court decision that allowed the IRS to revoke tax-exempt status from schools that banned interracial relationships. Are folks getting a little too far ahead of themselves here, Rick?
Yeah, I think way too far ahead of themselves. Look, as Vermicelli said when asked the question by one of the justices, yeah, it might be an issue. It might be a problem. It's something we'll have to confront. I think the big distinction now, though, is the Hobby Lobby case will weigh heavily on this sort of thing. I personally seriously doubt that the federal government is ever going to tell a man of the cloth or a woman of the cloth who they must marry. I just don't think that's going to be an issue here.
And what do you think, Kevin? I mean, that is the concern, the slippery slope that now churches might be forced to perform same-sex marriages or lose their tax-exempt status.
That would be a powder keg ready to explode if that ever happened. I mean, the reality is the First Amendment is something that this country was founded on. It's religious freedom. And to deny, these pastors or these priests to be able to practice the religion they deem fit, this is a closely held religious belief that it's between a man and a woman, between a lot of Christian churches, and denying that would cause a huge rift. It's a slippery slope to go down to start telling religions how to practice their own faith. And I would say that, it would splinter the Democratic Party hard on the secular progressives and the moderate Clinton-type voters. And the Republicans will be able to really rally around something like this.
Yeah, you would think it'd be...
There's also one other critical distinction. In the interfaith marriage case, if you look at the case itself, there was no solid case ever presented suggesting that any religious rights were being violated or religious interests were being violated by marrying an race couple.
Right.
Very different in the case of gay marriage.
All right, fair enough. A lot different. And interesting to note, too, in the last two big Supreme Court cases, you had Roberts yesterday, and then you had Kennedy today. Kennedy appointed by Reagan, and Roberts appointed by Bush. Interesting, you know, these Supreme Court nominees don't always go the way they think they're going to go. And also interesting to note how strongly President Obama, then Senator Obama, opposed the nomination of John Roberts. Rick, about 20 seconds to go.
You know, the message that I have been sending out to people on my side, the liberal side, is stop attacking these Supreme Court justices for acting politically. They do vote their conscience, even if you don't agree with them and their interpretation of the law. Give them that credit.
All right, gentlemen, we'll be coming right back. The prospect of lawsuits now hangs over this decision as well. We'll talk about that issue when we return. And we welcome you back for part two of our Friday Roundtable. With us again, senior political contributor to Forbes.com and co-host of the Daily Wrap, Rick Ungar, and Newsmax contributor Kevin Broderick. Kevin, I want to get your reaction to the dissent from Justice Antonin Scalia saying that this court is a, quote, threat to American democracy.
Well, I mean, it sort of falls in line with what happened yesterday. His dissent was pretty scathing of Roberts and it becoming SCOTUS care. He feels as though that, you know, the court's overreaching and extending their hands into what looks like swaying public opinion. And he looks at the court as a body that's supposed to hold to the laws of the land. And he disagrees with this law, and you have to respect that, but he does feel like it's being a bit more of an activist court, and he's disagreeing with that, and you know, that's his stand.
What do you think, Rick? Also yesterday in the Roberts decision, he cited Marbury versus Madison, which is the original activist court, is it not?
Well, it's not the original act, but it's probably the most important judicial ruling in the history of the court. Long discussion as to why that's the case. Look, you know, I actually, as much as I disagree with Justice Scalia on almost what time it is, I've always considered him to have an absolutely brilliant legal mind. I have lots of respect for him, but I got to tell you, I think he's possibly reaching the end of his time on the court. He's saying things that I really wouldn't expect any justice to say. To say that I disagree with his remark would be an understatement. In fact, what this case does today is prove the value of our democracy and the role the court has to play in it when it comes to protecting rights. So, no, I disagree. And as to yesterday's decision, what he's not saying is that he used a very similar interpretive means on the first Obamacare case to form his opinion. So, you know, he's kind of going back and forth here, and I can't tell you I'm comfortable with the things he's saying.
Yeah, well, you know, going back to Roberts, there was even some speculation about what the president had over John Roberts that forced him to decide that way. We could have that discussion maybe another day. Let's talk, though, about this effort by conservatives to, quote-unquote, protect religious liberty. Earlier this month, Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, signed a bill that allows clergy members to have the right to refuse to conduct marriages that violate their own religious beliefs. Do you see this catching on, Rick, in other southern states?
Well, you're talking about that ordinance in that little city?
Yes, the Pastor Protection Act.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a state law in Texas.
I think it's not even required. I think, you know, it's getting silly. I don't think pastors need to be protected. And there is that one small town that passed a law saying that pastors had to marry same-sex couples. That's not going to survive constitutional scrutiny ever. So I think everybody's overreacting, as they tend to do. I'm afraid they tend to do it for political reasons. As I said earlier, I just don't believe that any court in the land is going to force a pastor to marry anybody he doesn't want to. Don't think they need the protection, and I don't think anybody can or should force somebody to do that. I just don't see it happening.
All right, Kevin, I want to get your take here because we know President Obama kind of evolved on this, or really did evolve. Let's take a listen to what he had to say when he was running for president.
Would you support a constitutional amendment with that definition?
No, I would not.
Why not?
And because historically, we have not defined marriage in our Constitution. It's been a matter of state law.
My sense is that the Supreme Court is about to make a shift, one that I welcome. It's time to recognize that under the Equal Protection Clause of the United States, same-sex couples should have the same rights as anybody else.
Now, we know the president evolved on the issue here, but do you think it was maybe a little bit disingenuous for him to kind of today take a victory lap on this issue?
Of course. I mean, he was spiking the football today, saying that he was calling it an equality issue, whereas, you know, all the way back, what was that, 2008, he was saying, you know, this is he supports traditional marriage. This was an opportunist play by the president of the United States, plain and simple. There's really no other way to look at it. He called it evolving, but there's secret whispers behind the scenes there saying, well, he was always for it, but he couldn't come out and say it because he wouldn't get elected, et cetera, et cetera. Sort of a cowardly move, to be honest with you. If you're for gay marriage, stand up and say it. Don't say you're evolving to please the gay lobby, like you're going to be coming around to it just to maintain that voter base. I really
last
do
word to
think it
you,
was
Rick. About a
flip-flop.
minute left to go. I want to get your take there because you don't believe the president really had much to do with this at all.
Not at all. And I'm stunned to find out that politicians in America might lie to for
get
political
elected, I
purposes.
know.
Amazing. Amazing. I can't believe it. Gosh. Now, look, the president in this instance is no different than the rest of us. He is a bystander. He had nothing to do. It's not a matter of legislation that he supported or pushed through. This was simply a case of plaintiffs coming before the court and saying, please, tell us that we have these rights, and that's what they did. The president expressed the pleasure that a lot of Americans are feeling. I know there's some who aren't. I listened to what he said. He didn't take any credit for it, so you can take political shots if
Well, he
that's
didn't have to do
of
the
some
speech from
benefit
the
to
Rose
you.
Garden
But
today.
The president was
we could-
against gay marriage until it was a 51% approval rating.
Yes,
They all would
I
be, guys.
agree.
Sorry, we're out of
That's
time.
what happened.
Well,
I
we're
mean-
out of time,
Great.
gentlemen. Rick Ungar, Kevin Broderick. Great conversation today, guys. More to come here on Newsmax Now.